Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on how I understand the strengths and weaknesses of various systems of play to support play development. And joining me today are three distinguished and experienced individuals. Emily Senior, vast experience in the senior game, women and girls, who, like myself, is the coach development officer for the North East Yorkshire region. And we also joined by Paul Holder, Noddy, charismatic youth coach developer in today's webinar. And today's real aims is very much look at what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of playing a 4-2-3-1 system against a 3-4-2-1 system. So we'll be looking at some comparisons around that, which I'll be looking at. And then Emily will take us through what the understandings are of what is meant by systems of play. And then Noddy will design some practice designs and go through this and give us some real insight.
We're going to break down the view on systems, but I think it's really important that we recognise that there's a bit of a golden thread to your game approach here. So systems, strategies and tactics, they're what underpin the game approach. So the way that we play, the way that we want our team to play. So when we're talking about systems, we're talking about the structure. I know that word was mentioned a lot in the chat box. It's the structure that we use to organise the key principles, both in and out of possession for our team. It gives a framework for players. So about their roles, their responsibilities within the team. So without having that framework, it would be difficult for us to structure what them roles and responsibilities look like, no matter the age range that the players are at. And it also supports us for our planning of both training and analysis for match days as well. So without that system, it becomes really difficult for us to be able to plan. But it's important to note that strategies are often something that are interlinked with the system. And I think the two you'll probably hear throughout the call tonight are really interlinked. So we might have a certain system that we play, but the strategy, the way that we're approaching the game, might be very different for different teams that use the same system. So it's important that we notify everybody of that at the beginning of the call so that you start to see how things might differ depending on the team, the personnel that they have, the opposition that they're coming up against, all these key aspects. We've given an example there of what a strategy might be. So, for example, if the ball's in the opposition's defensive third, our strategy might be that we want to win the ball high. We want to win it high up the pitch, and that would be our strategy. And then tactics, another part that we obviously have to look at when we're looking at our game approach. Tactics are going to be within those strategies. So it's individual actions for the individual unit or team. So considerations of maybe the strengths and areas of areas to develop for both your team and the opposition. That's what's going to come into our tactics. And it supports our planning and training just as the rest of it does as well. So when we looked at this, we wanted to highlight some of the key formations that we've seen in the professional games from our Insights team. So when we've looked at the top leagues in both men's and women's game, these are the type of systems that we see readily being played. So you can see there the 4-2-3-1, the 4-3-3, and there is a subtle difference between the two. I think they commonly do get kind of mixed with one another, but there are subtle differences, and we'll talk about that. And the 3-4-2-1 as well becoming much more prominent in the most modern game. So when we talk about the 4-2-3-1 and the 4-3-3, it really is down to what you can see there on the screen. So it's that double pivot versus that single pivot piece. So in the 4-2-3-1, we might want a more defensive structure in front of that back line. And again, that might come down to the personnel that you have. So when we're working with younger players, when we're trying players in different roles, it's making sure that we've given them the opportunity to be in a more defensive shape so that they can see what it looks like when they're trying to screen in front of the half spaces to stop the ball coming into the strikers to help the defensive unit out. Whereas if they're in the single pivot, it might be that you're asking them to look for space a little bit more in the pockets when they're in possession, for example. Just a couple of examples of how that might differ for them. So now we're going to look at in possession versus out of possession, because it's good to note that systems can be really fluid. So any one team might change their system when they're playing both in possession and out of possession. And as coaches, when we're trying to bring messages across to players about their roles and responsibilities within a system and within the strategies, we've got to be clear and make it quite simple on how them transitions look when we're in possession or out of possession. So we're going to look at an Aston Villa women's game here, the same game that we watched previously that we made comments on. And we can see here that Aston Villa in possession, and we saw it from the clip where they were playing out, shaped up with the 4-2-3-1. So the double pivot to try and come and collect the ball in the central spaces. They actually used that double pivot when playing out to pull players deeper into the space so that they could play into the space that was left behind. And they asked their striker to do the same so that they could play into the space behind. Whereas out of possession, what we tend to see from Villa, or particularly in this game, and again, opposition can play into this. So Villa might change that tactic coming up against a different opposition, and that's something to consider, is that they changed into the 4-4-2. So we also looked at the men's game. So here, a completely different system of play and a completely different way to transition from in possession to out of possession. So just trying to show you a few different examples. And I want to make sure that we make it really clear on how we make that transition simple for players' messages so that they know what's expected of them. So here you've got the 3-4-2-1 that then shapes into the 5-2-3 when we're out of possession. So in this case, Wolves trying to create a shape that means that the opposition have very much got to play everything in front of their back line. It's very hard to break down. It's very difficult to play around or through because of the 5 at the back, which means they're going to hope that setup allows for everything to be played in front of them. And so it's going to take a lot of combination play in and around that front line to try and draw them out into space.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what we're going to try explore now, we're just going to try and have a bit of a compare and contrast, but still sort of stay on task in terms of the player development focus as well. And Em's obviously clearly articulated the 4-2-3-1 and the 3-4-2-1, but just a few sort of systems and their differences. When you do look at a 4-2-3-1, yes, we talk about you can have a lone striker up top who can be connected to a 10 behind with a 7 and 11, so they could stay connected. And when you see a 4-2-3-1, it also offers passing angles where you have 2 6s who might have a staggered approach. And then obviously the 3-4-2-1, you know, I've worked on this system quite a lot as well, where you can create a box, create a diamond, you have 3 centre backs who can. This centre back, and we talk about capabilities and the theme around developing skillful players, around core skills with a centre back stepping in, but also when you sort of look at systems, I always think is it's not about systems; it's always about the principles, what you're trying to get out, and the most important thing is what is your coaching philosophy, what is your playing style as well. You know, we might have wing backs that stay high. Because we trust our 2 6s to cover them laterally across the midfield. So as we move on, so if we go head to head here now, so it's a centre back, right sided centre back receiving it. We've got a box in the middle, and it's the confidence of establishing players that can play through to get out. And you talked about earlier with Ems about having that central corridor, the importance of a numerical advantage in here. So we've got foundation youth player coaches in here, youth development phase coaches in here. What's your thoughts around players now in terms of capabilities being brave enough to play through the middle?
I think if you take it back a bit, people play a box or diamond. If players don't understand space, time, and particularly how to create space and how to use it, then that ain't going to work anyway. And if you look at most systems, they're all the same in many respects. They exploit space, either wide or deep, in and around players, and the whole purpose of the system is to break lines, is to penetrate the opposition, and in the end break the end line, which is the goal line. And so if you can play any system you like, but it will follow the same principles. If you support play, and you only got to look at the principles of play. If your support play is not very good, if you don't get width and depth in some way or another, and whatever that looks like, if you don't get movement and players don't understand how to create space and how to use space, then you're not going to break lines. So that system is pointless. So the whole thing is predicated on the idea that, one, there's got to be core skills. So coaches have to get the kids better at the core skills. It's don't get hooked on a system, get hooked on the principles of play and what best suits your players at any one time. And if you've got, so for example, 3 really good, let's take older players, 14, 15, you've got 3 really good defenders, and play 3 defenders. If you've got 2 number 10s, then play 2 number 10s. If you've got 2 wingers, then think, and that's where they play, then you need to play with wide players. What people do sometimes is they play with wing backs, and wing back is I'll give you 4 things that are for kids to struggle with in youth development, for example. One is playing a wing back because of the physical load of getting up and down the pitch constantly. And the other thing is a diamond, which people play with young kids and expect the left and right side of the diamond, which is a physical punch, by the way. And you've got to take that into account as well. I need these kids to have energy to play the game. So don't put in a formation which that energy is going to be drained after 10 minutes.
Onto right, when we look at our 3, obviously we've got a lone striker there. And this will probably link to the next piece as well, in terms of the sort of hybrid centre-back, John Stones, how he just steps into it as well. The importance of allowing your centre-backs to be brave, to drop into midfield areas, to overload. So if he's nudging in, and that might nudge the little 10 over as well to affect the back line as well.
I think John Stones is not the common centre back. There's still, and most people on the call here will not have many John Stones in their teams. Yeah, he's a midfielder, come centre back. He can play. He's very adaptable to go anywhere. I think the thing is again, that what he's very good at is just seeing the space and moving into it. When he breaks a line because he's dribbling or driving with the ball, it upsets the other team's shape and pulls people out of position. So when you're playing a certain formation, it doesn't matter what it is can it disrupt the opposition? If it doesn't disrupt the opposition, it's probably not doing its job. So, and when you looked at that example where the 4th, they played down the side and got a cross in, that's about width. Same principle, get width. There's still this thing, look, you can have as many formations as you like, but most goals are scored inside the penalty area, so you need to get the ball in there somehow. That ball has to get into that penalty area, either somebody having it at their feet or the ball going in on a cross. And if you've got players that can do that and that they play a certain formation and it helps them, happy days.
I think players like John Stones, though, do make it really obvious that we should be making sure that players in youth development have the opportunity to be in those 360 positions as well, though, instead of just positions where a lot of the game's in front of them, because he is able to adapt to lots of different situations. So I think it hammers home that point of making sure that players are trialing different situations, trialing different roles and responsibilities, so that they can add so much to their toolkit. Definitely.
Over to you, Nadine, how we could, stuff what Em and myself have talked about with yourself, how can we put this into a practice design now?
I think, it's gone a bit weird. I think you've got to be careful with what's that there? It's flashing. I think you have to be careful when you talk about practice design and being too specific about it. Sometimes you just look at it, if you've got a formation like 4-2-3-1, and you say, do you know what? I think the key relationship, I'm just saying, this is me planning. I think the key relationship is the two centre backs and the two holding midfield players. Then they need to be in my bullseye. They need to be fundamental to maybe a practice I'm doing. Now, I'm not saying everyone else can't benefit, but sometimes you have to focus on a certain number of players. So I've said that that triangle there is I need the goalkeeper, the two centre backs, and so I want to work on a relationship between the two centre backs and the two midfield players, and maybe one in front centrally. So I wanted to look at the central side. Sometimes we can do generic stuff and cover the whole ground, or you can be really focused in where you put your practice. So if you then ring the players and you think, right, if that was an area I'm working with and they're my players, what could a practice look like? And so you can build practices around just that format and say, ring that area and say, do you know what? How many players would be in that area if the ball was in there, so on and so forth. So there's a bit of geography planning in this. So I've always got the two centre backs and I've always got the two pivot players. So even if I'm doing a leading practice here where there's 6v6 in the middle there, and the yellows keep the ball, using those four players integrally, those four players, the two centre backs are playing with the two pivots in this practice. And the idea is to use the goalkeeper and the target player to keep the ball. And you can score if the ball goes from one end to the other, but they build up relationships with each other. And then the Blues break up possession and score either versus the goalkeeper or run across the end line at the other end. I think sometimes we have to think, look, we haven't got two goals. I've only got one goalkeeper. How do we use players in the best possible way, and how do I make it competitive, directional, and is there some way of scoring? So in that particular practice, the Blues, if they win it, the yellows are playing, the four yellows I said were playing with each other, plus a couple of others, and they're hitting a target player, which could be in the formation, the centre forward, and they're finding this target player. And remember not to keep the target player up there too long.
Noddy, just before we move on, we've had a question that I feel like might be good for a few people that are on the call. So we've said, you know, if you've only got 12 players, that a practice like this would be perfect. You can still work on the tactical principles for the geography of the pitch. But what about if it's the other extreme? What if you have 20 players but you wanted to bring out something like this? Should we maybe give the coaches on the call an idea of how you might replicate this? Maybe parallel practices, etc. Any other ideas?
You can duplicate that side by side, yeah. But there is a recognition, and this is not a cop out, but sometimes you just can't do these practices. If you've got 20 players, you've got to meet the needs of those 20 players, and you go, this is not the time to just focus on 4. Yeah, I think what we're doing here is to say that's a great, because I've been in that situation many, many times. And so everybody's come to football to learn, to have a go at something, you know, and to focus on a few players is that's tough on the kids left behind. So, but you can duplicate practices if you've got the facilities, yeah, one after side by side. If the games are really simple, they run concurrently. And I'm not saying I'm any better than anyone else, but I've done 3 practices of 12 players in each before, side by side, and they just run. I think if the practices are game-like and the rules are really simple, those duplicate practices are really easy to manage.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? It's when you look at complicated things with complicated rules and things like that, and you think, well, why isn't this working? And you go, well, hello. It's because it's too complicated. You see what I mean? So if you have got big numbers and you want to split them into smaller groups, then that's pretty straightforward to do, but make it simple. The other thing is there's no reason why, if you had two coaches, that someone can't take a big number of kids and you take a small number and you swap over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There are ways around it. You just have to, if you've got two coaches, is to liaise with each other and think what's best for the kids. Sometimes, and I know this isn't the best thing, sometimes they just need a game.
Yeah.
And you just say, well, it's 10v10 and we'll coach within the game. Yeah, this practice, it's exactly the same, or no, it's not exactly the same. It's similar. Is that the two centre backs and the two pivot players are playing with a 10, but the target player now is marked and screened. Now this is I quite like this up into the end bit, up where he's just moved or she's moved just there, and the idea for that is to get target players screened. What that does is makes it harder for the yellows to get the ball to the target player. And often we mark players, we might have that, but if you put a screen in front, it really changes the dynamics, because that yellow target player has got to work hard to get free. And that also helps with, if you put screen players in, that screen player has to scan, see where there's a lot of work to be done in learning how to screen. And it's a big thing about marking and screening. So the blues are marking and screening there, and the same similar, but the yellows have now probably got to work a little bit harder to get the ball to the target player. They can get into the zone and you can mess about with that, but essentially that target player is now marked and screened, and that causes a lot of changes, more passes in the middle, more combinations in the middle, and so on and so forth. And then the blues can steal it and do whatever. It's a basic sort of thing that can happen. But there's an empty goal, because if you've earned the right 1 against 2, then I'm not going to put a goalkeeper in the way. Yeah, put it in the goal. If you've earned your space, put that thing in the goal, because that would be 1 against 3, and that's probably too much.
Okay, so I think we've had a great discussion what it means to players as well. So just from some of the key messages around. Okay, we started off systems, and then we've gone really sort of dissected it in a real play down. What were some of the key messages for you to put across to the coaches who are on here today?
I think the key takeaway needs to be that, look, the players that you've got, that's what matters. That's what matters. So if you've got players that play in a certain role or have attributes of a certain role, play them there, and the system will create itself so that you can start to apply different strategies, different tactics for them to go out and express themselves. So for me, that's the big takeaway that I'd hope has hit home throughout this. It's been a bit of a golden thread in everything that we've said. We're not Pep Guardiola. We're not at the top level of the game where we can go and get the players to suit the system that we want to play. So don't get hung up on that. But you want the players that you've got to get the most out of what they're doing come match day and come training. So yeah, let them play, and the system will come through that.
Well, here's one fundamental thing that I think coaches could think is, and in order for any system to work, I don't care what you call it, there has to be teamwork. And teamwork means all my mates together, for the same aim, so on and so forth. And you can have teamwork at under 7, 8, 9, 10, under 50. Teamwork is really important. What does that look like? It means supporting each other. And then if you back that up with players, it means supporting each other when things go well, supporting each other when things are not going well. And if you work on the basic skills in a competitive directional environment, which is motivating, you've got a great chance of them having a go at any system that you want to put down. But they've got to understand time, space, and the numbers.
And what about you, Pat? Any key takeaways from you?
I do like we see it, but we don't feel it. That's a massive key message for me. And and this is the thing, is can we see it in the player's eyes through their lens, which is really important. And the biggest thing for me is we talk about systems, we talk about formations, and it is about relationships. Okay, that relationship between the goalkeeper and the defender, that relationship between the defender and the fullback, just those small little bits, those twos, threes, and obviously with the new future fit coming in with the 3v3 formats as well. I'm looking forward to the future, but small bits certainly make big bits better. That's massive for me.